Hi everyone, this is Brett Sankis, the Right Brain Business Attorney. This is another video in our series about mastering business partnerships. The question I'm often asked is, what do I do if I don't have any money, if my partners and I don't have any money to hire an attorney to create our partnership agreement, our founder agreement? Great question. Let me tell you what you should not do. You should not go to LegalZoom and grab something off the shelf and sign it without knowing what it says. Kind of sort of goes without saying, but the number of times I've seen that happen, far too many to count. So, and I think there's a desire to have a piece of paper, right? There's a desire to have something in place. I'm not sure if that's worse than nothing, but it probably is. So, I run into situations often where people come into my office and they've got an agreement, they pulled it offline, and there's nothing against LegalZoom for certain contexts, for certain simple contexts like non-disclosure agreements and things that are pretty routine. But a partner and founder agreement is almost by definition a very custom process. When I do these, it's very iterative. We spend a lot of time talking about how things could work, how the founders want them to work. And something off the shelf, yeah, it's nice to have something signed, but people show up in my office years later and they say, we're having a problem and I don't really know what we do. Here's our agreement. I say, well, it says this, and I don't know why it says that, why we would have decided that. So my point being, you don't want, for something that's so important and ought to be custom, to grab something just off the shelf without knowing what it is. So nothing isn't a really great solution either. So I'm going to give you an excellent solution if you're just getting going in business. You've got partners or founders. If it's just you, it's a whole different story. But when you've got people where you can expect at some point you're going to want to go your separate ways and you may have some sort of difference of opinion about how that goes down, it's important that you have a deal on paper. This is what you should do. You should create what we call a back of the napkin agreement. Sometimes I call it a partner founder stopgap agreement, which isn't a really sexy term, but the idea is it's a placeholder for a later agreement. And I'm going to tell you what this should cover. It's a very basic agreement. You can handwrite it if you want and I'll sign it. I'm going to send you to a URL at the end of the video where you can go get our version of it. But basically it's a very simple DIY style agreement. There aren't lots of bells and whistles to it. It's not a replacement for hiring someone like me when you do have some money to do a proper agreement that covers all sorts of other things. This is going to cover a few main items in your partnership. But it's much better than getting some fancy agreement off the shelf that you don't know what that says, or just doing nothing. So what the things we cover in our stopgap or back of the napkin agreement are, number one, the names of the people who are participating. It kind of goes without saying. Who are the founders? Number two, what is the project? What are you doing together? Take a little bit of time to define that properly. If it's a part-time gig and you're doing other things in the world, you don't want to walk into a situation where your partners think they should have a piece of your other thing. So be very intentional about what this project is, what this venture is. Number three, economics. And number four, control. So economics and control are just about all that matters in the world of negotiating business deals. When it comes to investors and partners and founders, these are the big ones. So economics are, how much of this do you own from a percentage basis when we make some money, when we have dividends or distributions? What is your share? What's my share? That nearly always ties into what is your share and my share when we sell the business. Okay, you could separate those. We don't offer that in our very basic. Again, this is a DIY, very basic, can't mess it up, we're hoping kind of thing. It doesn't cover everything under the sun, but it covers the main stuff and it does it very simply. So who owns what percentage? Four, so that's number three. Number four is control. And that may often be perfectly aligned with the economics. So if you own 60% and I own 40, you may have 60% of the decision-making power and I've got 40. Well, we may do things differently than that, right? Or in our agreement, it talks about it will be majority voting, will be unanimous, how we make decisions. That's really important. How do we do those things together? Number five, so fifth thing that our agreement covers is, what are you going to do with the IP and the assets that the business either starts with because people contribute those things to the business or just develops over time. So what if this doesn't work out? What if it goes south? Who's going to own that stuff? If you don't talk about that, corporate law laws of the state where you form your LLC or corporation will fill in, and they'll say that you should sell those things. The process is to sell them to a founder could buy it, but you're supposed to have something that looks a little like an auction. You're supposed to try and get as much value into the business as you can, pay off the creditors, and then distribute to the owners pro rata according to their ownership percentages. But in the case where two people come together, you and I start a business together, and you've been working on something for 5 years, and it's just this awesome software platform, let's say, you may have an expectation that if this doesn't work out, we're not going to own it 60-40 or whatever our splits are. It's mine to take back. That's really important to touch on that issue. Are there expectations about that normal corporate law wouldn't fill in? Or sometimes the 80% owner, let's say there's one owner that owns the vast majority of the business. She owns 80% and the other two own 10 each. May have an expectation that I'm going to give this a shot with you, but if it doesn't work out, I want to do it on my own, and I want the assets to do it on my own. So it's a really important thing to at least get clear on up front. And then the last thing, and this is really key, and there are some other products out there if you Google around for things like this, free and DIY and back of the napkin sort of partnership agreement stuff. I'm not aware of any that has this in there, but this is critical to me. This is what makes the agreement really work. And that is, it's an agreement to upgrade this agreement. So it's a commitment to go back, hire an attorney like me to actually make this thing more formal. And so more words, more pages doesn't necessarily make something better in a vacuum, but I try real hard not to waste a whole lot of words and say things with 10 when I can use 2, that sort of thing. So more pages generally means I'm covering more things that could later come up. And they're rarely ridiculous things that we could ever imagine coming up. So my point being, you're going to, if you go to the URL I give you in a minute, do a 2-page agreement. I'm going to do a 10, 15, 30-page agreement. It depends on, how many partners and what you're doing and all that other stuff. But there's things to be covered that you're not covering here. You need to understand that. But again, I think it's much better to cover the really important stuff properly in a custom manner, however you need to get that done, rather than go buy some 30-page full of legalese agreement that covers other stuff, but you have no idea really how it's covering it or what it's saying. So to me, this last provision, which says at a certain point in time that we hit a certain amount of revenue per month, profit per month, money in the bank, time, whatever it is, it could be multiple things. We agree we're going to invest in an attorney who represents the company typically to do a more fulsome, proper partnership founder agreement. That's a great idea. And as long as you set the expectation and you stick with that, you don't have a problem today in a new business if you don't have a partnership agreement. You don't have anything going on yet. And you don't have a problem probably in 6 months. I mean, I guess if you land Google as a client or something, it's possible. But my point is, between now and then, you still don't have a huge problem. You can always break things up, go your separate ways, figure it out. When you have a problem is if you do nothing today, you bury your head and you grow a business for 4 years, and now you have a multi-million-dollar business, and now you get sideways with your partners. That's a problem. So saying we don't have any money today, we're going to do this simple agreement, and then when we hit $10,000 a month in revenue, we'll go do a more fulsome agreement. That works almost always, right? You're not going to have a problem at that point with $10,000 a month in revenue. It's possible, but unlikely. The key, though, is committing to it and then going get the larger agreement. So that's why we call it a stopgap. It's a placeholder or a fill in the blank. I will say one other thing. If you're starting a typical technology type company, Clerky, LegalZoom, they do a decent job, especially Clerky, on standard documents for that. So you can get stock purchase agreements that have good vesting schedules and stuff that works. What you don't get, though, and this is kind of what I'm getting at, you might be able to get by with that, maybe, but they don't handle a stockholders agreement well. It's not a custom thing. It's an off-the-shelf thing. I don't even know if they have one, by the way, but it's like, that's what I'm talking about. I'm not talking about the stock purchase agreement or vesting or filing a certificate with the state or some resolutions of the board. I mean, that's all like easy stuff. I'm talking about the heavy lifting that goes into making the partner-founder agreement among themselves tight and mirror what they want it to be. And that's the things that we've been talking about, those 6 things. That's the start of that. There's some other stuff in there, but those are the important ones. And you don't necessarily get that with the clerky package. And a stockholders agreement would cover things like, okay, our bylaws say it's majority voting, but really, as between us, we agree that we're both going to agree on everything important. It's like that's the custom piece of heavy lifting. That is where we earn our money as corporate lawyers, and that's the thing you need. And if you don't have any money for it today, here's a great way to just a hack, if you will, but at least it gets the job done and gets you down the line, and you're not taking, in my opinion, an undue amount of risk. So the URL, if you want to get a copy of our back of the napkin agreement, is businessattorneyinaustin.com/partners and founders. I know it's a big mouthful, it's a lot of words, but I'll give it to you again. It's fairly easy to remember, businessattorneyinaustin.com/partners and founders. I hope this has been useful for you. Hope you found value in it. Let me know if you did or you didn't, and I'll talk to you next time.